Hello, nerds! Nerds for Yang. I know you're super excited about this Evelyn Yang interview. It's a wonderful conversation. Super appreciative of her coming on the show. Before we get started, I want to call out a couple things. First is we shot the interview on January 13th. So this occurred before the news of Evelyn's experience with her OBGYN came to light. So we did not cover that topic. I will say now, in hindsight, having read a little bit about it, I just want to say how impressed and how grateful I am to Evelyn, and I think all of us in the Yang Gang are, for her sharing her story and shining a light on this kind of thing. And hopefully this will result in more awareness and action and consequences for people who commit these kinds of assaults. So with that said, that's why it's not going to be covered in the interview you're about to watch. News of that came out after we shot the interview. So the second thing I want to share is just my reflection on what I took away from the interview, and hopefully you will as well, which is that to me, Evelyn just comes across as a super authentic, warm, caring American mom. She's trying to raise her two kids. She's trying to juggle family and her own interests. She had a business career, and now is full-time caretaker for the two boys. She's trying to support Andrew in his effort to really change the world. And it's this kind of interesting combination of a woman who's very normal, very relatable, but also doing incredible things, which probably describes most American women and most American moms. So without further ado, I'll let all of us get to know Evelyn better and also get to know Andrew better through Evelyn. Let's get it started. Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! So nerds!
Hello,
nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's Andrew. Come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Oh my God, we have Evelyn Yang on the show than the two Andrew interviews, because it's very hard to get a hold of you, and we feel like very grateful that we're one of the first places that you've agreed to sit down and have a conversation with. So welcome to the show.
Tom, you are my first podcast, and I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
It's super exciting, and I have a lot of things that I wanted to cover. And at a high level, I first wanted to go into, well, who is Evelyn Yang? Like, you know, your background, where you grew up, school, that kind of work, that kind of stuff. And then I thought it would be kind of neat to go and talk about life before you were married to a presidential candidate, and then now your new role, this kind of change in the whole family schedule and your obligations and getting out on the road and stuff. And then finally, if there are particular social or political issues that are important to you, that would be a great conversation. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds great.
All right. So who is Evelyn Yang?
Well, I can start with where I was born, where I grew up. I was born and raised in Flushing, Queens. It's in New York. So I'm a native New Yorker to Chinese immigrants. I have a younger brother, Theo, who I think you know, right?
Yes.
He's 10 years younger than me. So I mostly grew up an only child. So I'd say I'm pretty lonely. I tried to make friends in the neighborhood. They were all boys, so I was sort of a tomboy. But growing up, I was pretty independent. No one really minded my schoolwork or my schedule. It was back in the days when you just let your kid roam free after school, and I would show up at home.
Come back in time for dinner.
Yes.
Yeah.
Those were the days, right?
Yeah. When you were okay, like letting the kids kind of run around, and you weren't as focused on tracking them every minute the way many of us do now.
No one was tracking me at all. But both my parents worked. When my brother was born, I would I would babysit. I started working when he was born. I started babysitting him and all his little friends in the neighborhood when I got a little older, and I was slightly older than 10.
But I guess, yeah. So at some point when you were probably, I guess, in your early teens, you probably helped take care of Theo. Like he was.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
way we would take care of him was mostly play video games with him. I don't know if you knew this about my brother, but he's a total gamer. He was, even as a little kid, and now I find myself feeling deja vu all the time when I play video games with our boys.
Mm-hmm.
Because our boys are also really good at video games, and I find myself thinking, man, I'm getting beat at Mario Party by a toddler again.
Yeah, it was funny when I was chatting with Theo one time. He made sure I knew. He's like, hey, because I mentioned I had read Andrew's book. He's like, well, I just want to make it clear that I was nationally ranked in such and such a game. And I was like, oh, I didn't read that part in the book. He's like, yeah, I was one of the top, whatever. He was like top 10 or something.
He was. I don't even know how little he was. My parents would take him to these Pokemon tournaments with, I mean, teenagers and like twice his age. And he came back with like binders full of cards. He would have just all these cards away from. I mean, it was.
He was like a Pokemon mogul.
He was. Now he's a very good uncle to our boys because obviously I don't.
Yeah, and now like when you're on the road, does he pitch in and keep an eye on the boys? Yeah.
I actually called him away from Hawaii last weekend to be with the boys. Yeah, I know. He's a very good uncle. Part for the campaign.
Did you have any hobbies or sort of passions when you were growing up? Obviously, Theo had the gaming.
I told you there were no girls in my neighborhood, and as the only child, I basically picked up what the boys in my neighborhood were into, and they were mostly like comics and the cards, like X-Men. So I feel like I've forgotten most of that part of my life, but I remember doing a lot of that, like running around and trading cards, and trade all my good cards away, I think, for the female superheroes and even the female villains. I just thought they were the coolest. So I didn't really know which cards were good or, valuable.
Right. So your collection was very pro woman leader.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you remember? I don't know. Our eras are a little different. I'm a little older than you and Andrew. But do you remember Garbage Pail Kids? Do you remember those at all?
Yes, I do. I do.
Those are fun. So you grew up in Flushing, in New York, and then what about school?
Well, I went to a public school, like most kids in my neighborhood, and I, did well in school. I don't think I was particularly studious, but like Andrew, I think we share that standardized testing gene.
It comes in handy.
Yeah. So I did well in school, but I didn't, like I said, my parents were not very on top of my my studies, and I think I just, I did well enough to stay in the gifted classes.
It's interesting that you mentioned your parents were pretty hands off, because I know my parents put a little more pressure on me.
Yeah.
And I was curious, like, what's your kind of parenting philosophy now that you're on the other side of the table and you've got little ones trying to raise them? And
they're little, so I don't think I'm, we're not at the point yet where we're trying to, get them into Harvard or so. And I think both Andrew and I we're pretty relaxed on that front. We absolutely do not drive ourselves crazy trying to accelerate them to, some kind of like vision of success that, maybe, I don't know. I didn't grow up that way. And Andrew, I don't think grew up that way. If anything, I think, when he went to Exeter for high school, I think he was the one who advocated for that on behalf of himself.
Right.
I don't think his parents, but yeah, I think he did like what he calls the nerd camps growing up. I didn't do that. My parents were much more clueless, I think.
Yeah, well, some of those nerd camps, like, you got to be kind of in the know.
Yeah, exactly.
I remember when I was in college, someone said to me like, "Oh, did you do the such and such camp?" Or they were like, "Oh, you probably did the such and such camp, right?" And I was like, "No, I didn't know anything about that." Like, my parents had immigrated from Hong Kong, and they were not familiar with all these special programs and things like that.
So I'm actually pretty
Yeah.
impressed with Andrew's parents that they were
They're
pretty
on top of it.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. They were. I gotta ask my mom, like, "Hey, what happened?"
Yeah, so we're really not at that point with our kids yet. We'll have to see. You know, I think our philosophy is to go with their interests and what they seem to enjoy. So those are the extracurriculars that I try to find now for the boys, things that they seem to enjoy, and it's a good break from their usual hobbies of video games.
hmm Yeah, well, that's a pretty progressive approach in that, there are of course the tiger parents. They've got the flashcards out and their kids are like 3 grades ahead, and they'd run circles around my kids. But I kind of feel that in the long run, I mean, look, take you and Andrew as examples. You've done pretty well in life, and it wasn't like you were drilled to, you had to hit these expectations. It doesn't sound like it was as high pressure as like some families can be. And I kind of feel like you want well-rounded, grounded, confident people who've had a little bit of freedom to make mistakes and develop their interests. And at least that's the approach I'm taking. And it sounds like, is that where you guys are kind of gravitating towards as well for the boys on your side?
Yes, very much so. At least so far. You know, who knows if they end up playing too much video games for the next several years? We might be like, you know what you need? You're camp. But who knows?
Yeah.
You know, kind of taking it a bit at a time, and we also have different circumstances. From we're dealing with special needs and other things in particular. So I think that in a way we might have been on a different parenting path, right? And we never imagined to be navigating the world of special needs. And that's a very different set of options, a different kind of road. So we're just trying to figure that out and take it a day at a time.
How do you think about the kind of educational track for the two boys? Because they do have different needs. Do you try and come up with sort of an approach that works for both, or do you kind of tailor it to each kid, or how do you?
You are giving us way too much credit right now, Tom. We are not planning the road to college just yet. I mean, it would be great if college is what they want to do and if it suits their passion and interest. But I have no idea right now where they're going to end up. I can't tell. I mean, if I had to guess right now, I feel like Christopher has the personality of a scientist, and Damien has the interests of an architect. Mostly because he likes to build things. But who knows? They're just kids right now, and we're happy to just let them be kids.
And what about your path to college? How did you think about that journey for you?
I went to Columbia University, and that was, in New York. And at the time, that is where I wanted to stay. I wanted to be close to friends and family. Yeah, and that's where I ended up. In fact, that's actually where I met Andrew. Right.
Yeah. What did you study at Columbia?
Economics.
Excellent.
Right.
So you and Andrew did not overlap. Was he at the law school when you ran into him?
No, so we were already both graduates. We were back on campus for an event, and it was the first time we met. People ask us all the time, how did you guys first meet? It really was not very interesting or romantic, but we were with a group of people, mutual friends. I think we were both seeing people at the time, so we were just having some, conversation. And I remember thinking at the time that, oh, this guy, he's really smart, he's funny, but there were no romantic sparks flying in the air. That wasn't until later.
Yeah. How long between when you first met him to when you guys started seeing each other, as a couple?
Well, that was, I think, many months after we first met. one of my dearest friends started taking a class at his GMAT company.
Mm.
And that's how we reconnected. And that's how we got together.
Well, it's funny, like your first podcast interview is on the Nerds for Yang channel. So I feel like this is a very meta conversation. So he went to nerd camp, and did he come across a little nerdy to you when you met him, or was he quite the suave Andrew Yang we know today?
Oh, no, not suave. Smart, yes. But definitely not suave. In fact, he said some really strange things to me on our first couple of dates, including things like, my mother would love you. And, and I was like, wow. But, I loved it. It was very clear that this was this very genuine, earnest guy. He wore his heart on his sleeve. It was clear he liked me. There were no games. I really appreciated that.
So he was violating some of the cardinal rules of modern, as what I understood in the past to be modern male courtship, which is you're not supposed to
have some kind of manual about this.
yeah. I think there's a book. I know my brother reads it. You're not supposed to indicate any interest at all.
Ridiculous. I don't know. I mean, I don't think I've ever been one of those people who liked someone who played hard to get. I like transparency.
Yeah. Well, so Andrew unknowingly or maybe knowingly had the optimal strategy by being super transparent up front with you.
For me, absolutely. Sure.
Yeah. Has that been one of the things about him that has stayed the same, or like, how do you feel like he has evolved or changed over the years?
Oh, most definitely. Andrew jokes sometimes on the trail that I said to him he would be a horrible, horrible politician because he's so bad at lying. And that was from the very beginning. I don't know. He's never been. Even if I put something on and I'm like, how does this look? And it could be this. He might be trying to make me feel better about something, and I'm like, okay, I can tell, like, by that look on your face.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has come up when we've had previous guests and we've talked about Andrew is a lot of us agree that if you had a friend that you had to loan money to or borrow money from, or you had to really entrust, like he'd be someone who you'd feel like, yeah, he's going to do the right thing. And I'm guessing you probably saw that in him when you guys decided to get married.
Oh, yes. I mean, he's always just doing the right thing. I mean, I just so many time and time again, he's, I've seen him put other people's interests ahead of his own, and he never fails to do that. He's just he has such a strong moral compass, and it guides everything he does.
Yeah, I could see that even the act of running for president.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if honestly, if he were a buddy of mine and he said, "Hey, Tom, I'm thinking of running for president," I'd be like, "Dude, what are you thinking? Like, there's no upside for you.
For sure.
There's all downside."
Something that haunts me to this day is remember Sam Harris, who is one of his first podcast interviewers.
Yeah.
Went on to some other show and started talking about this perfectly otherwise reasonable guy, very smart and well-meaning. And he was talking about Andrew, and he said something like, but he's just, he's ruining his life running for president. And luckily, that was a while ago. I think that was when he first started. But certainly that was the risk, right? When people, especially our friends and family, first learned that this is what he was going to embark on, we didn't know what the future was going to hold. And obviously, you can imagine a lot of risk, a lot of humiliation.
Yeah. Especially like before the Joe Rogan interview, he wasn't nearly as well known, obviously, as he is today. And he was kind of I imagine it must have been like he's this traveling salesman trying to get people to listen.
Right.
And, like he might show up at the Iowa fair and probably there weren't thousands of people running to him, when he first went out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
Did you ever go to any events with him in the early days before he kind of, got discovered?
I did not. So I'm a practical person in that, as he was doing this, he was building this from the ground up. I had more important things to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I prioritized our children, our family, which I still do. And, they were keeping me very busy. So I was very much not in the loop. I was kind of just letting him do his thing while I did my thing, while I was fully supportive of him being out there. I can't say that I expected it to last this long.
I don't think, other than Andrew, I don't know if there were a lot of people who thought it would go this far.
I certainly thought that he would last a lot longer than people assumed initially, because I know how smart he is. I know how competent he is. But this is something else, right? Where we are today.
Yeah, it reminds me of a scene. Do you remember the movie Princess Bride? And there's a point where the lady says to the gentleman that as they're trying to embark on storming the castle, they're like, "Okay, have fun storming the castle," and it's like they don't really think anything's gonna come of it. And I could see you saying, "Yeah, have fun going to Iowa." Yeah. If someone told you 10 years ago, how long ago did you guys meet?
We've been together now almost 15 years.
So 15 years ago, if they said, "Hey, you know this dude, Andrew? Yeah, he's going to run for president." What would you have said?
The hills. I've always had zero interest in politics. That's something that would have, if he told me when we first met that he had political ambition, I do not think we would be together.
Especially for someone who values honesty and transparency, it's often not associated with people running for high political office. So yeah, that kind of makes sense. Now, so you studied economics. What was your first take when he said, "Hey, a universal basic income or a freedom dividend"? Like, what was your reaction?
I was incredulous. I thought, how could this be possible? It sounds too good to be true. And then he gave me his spiel, all the research that he had been doing, all the books he had been reading, all the experts he'd been talking to. And obviously, I see it myself. We all see automation happening around us. You walk into any CVS and you can see the kiosks and the screens replacing human jobs. So I understood what was happening in terms of automation. But this universal basic income was something else. I don't think I had heard of it before. If I did, it wasn't very present in my mind. But it's something that he became convinced that we needed in order to buffer our entire population from this, as he calls it, the fourth
industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had the same reaction when I first heard it. In fact, like what hooked me on Yang was a clip of his Rogan interview where he was talking about college, how college is overprescribed. And it's something that I've kind of intuitively felt was true for a long time. And it was great to hear him articulate. And then, of course, he had all the statistics and facts behind it. And then later I learned about the UBI stuff and also was a little bit like, I don't know. Yeah. But over time, as you dig in,
I mean, he told me about how Martin Luther King was fighting for this when he was assassinated, and how it was something that was very popular a couple of decades ago, even under Clinton, that it passed the House twice and became very, very close to becoming law. And how Alaska, a very conservative, deep red state, has a universal basic income, and how everyone in that state really, really likes it. It's something that, it's cash in your pocket.
Yeah.
And how can that be a bad thing, right?
I still remember early econ classes in college where, the prof would talk about how cash is one of the most efficient containers of value. It's, liquid. It helps you allocate it to get your maximum return. it's amazing how far it's come, and the conversation seems to be continuing and gathering steam.
Right.
I'm curious, what's the conversation been like with your friends and family? Like, I'm guessing when you first told them,
Yeah.
it was like, what? He's going to do what?
I have to be honest, I didn't do very much of spreading the word to our friends and family early on.
Yeah, I get you. Yeah.
It sort of hijacks the conversation if you start with, well, my husband is running for president. I kind of let them discover us or discover the campaign on their own.
Wow.
And over time, that's been very interesting to see. I almost have used it as a gauge to how well he's doing.
Mm.
The more people started coming around and or texting me or messaging me, emailing me randomly. Wait, what? I get a lot of, "You're Andrew Yang's wife? What?" Yes, it's been quite entertaining, actually.
Yeah. I'm guessing early days, probably not a lot of people knew, but now it's probably almost most people know, I would imagine, in terms of your friends and family.
Yes, our friends and
Yeah.
family for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's it been like for you as the spouse of the candidate and the mother of two kids with a busy life before he ran for president,
Mm.
and now he's on the road a lot? Like, what's it been like for you?
Well, we obviously miss Andrew when he's away. You can see how much fun he has on the trail. And that's the fun that he brings home when he's with us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're missing out on when he's away. And of course, we miss him dearly. The kids miss him dearly. I miss him dearly. It's a sacrifice. But the way I think of it now is at least he is having the impact that he intended. It's not just about elevating the conversation anymore, which he has.
Mm-hmm.
It's about changing the country.
I mean, the amount of lives he's touching, even just as a candidate and promoting his ideas and calling out these problems, you could argue it's probably more impact than he's had in many of his other pursuits, which have been also very impressive and had a lot of impact.
There's always been this common thread, I think, with him about empowering people and this desire that he has to help people reach their potential, human potential. You saw it through whether it was through education or through entrepreneurship and now through democracy. It's incredible to see that sort of evolution and where he's taken it, because this has always been, I would say, his passion, his interest. And to see it now, because of his experiences, take it to where we are today and what he's doing today. I definitely see how it happened. It didn't come out of nowhere. Yeah.
I mean, even his stint in corporate law, like he was at a pretty white shoe firm that a lot of people would, kind of fall all over themselves to get a job at. So he's at this high flying law firm, doesn't stay a long time. And that's not like a resume maximizing move, right? So when you guys met, had he already moved on and done the startup thing, or?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So you've known that he sort of takes sometimes unconventional paths.
I did. And I loved that about him when I met him. He was doing something very different. In New York City, what you find a lot is people in finance, people in marketing, media, but startups not as much, especially at the time. So I was definitely intrigued and impressed with how risk-taking he was and his entrepreneurial spirit. And it was clear to me that he was in pursuit of something other than money, frankly. Yeah. I think when we started dating, I made more than him. And when he was very, and I appreciated this about him too. You're talking about how smooth or not smooth he was. He was living in his mother's apartment in Manhattan, and I remember the first time I saw his apartment. he was very quick to tell me, this is not my apartment. This is my parents' apartment. And I was like, oh, well, great. Sharing that.
Well, I guess, he was on Startup Founder Economics there, right? Where
Yes,
he had,
he was very much, I think everything he and his partner, they were just funneling it back into the business.
Yeah, that is a struggle. That is a struggle. Yeah. So
he was well past the point of, I think he describes it in one of his earlier books. What did he do? I think he was going to like Panera and eating the free bread or something. I mean, that's not where he was when we met. So
he could have used that Freedom Dividend at that time. Yeah. One of the things I'm curious about, and this is actually a question from my wife, Wendy. I said, hey, I'm going to chat with Evelyn. Like, do you have any questions for her? And she's like, oh, yeah, I'd be curious. Like, what are the qualities that you've seen in Andrew that you think would translate into making him like a great president?
The first thing I think is integrity, right? And I think I mentioned this before. He has this very strong moral compass that guides everything he does. He doesn't lie. I've never seen him do a single unscrupulous thing. He's always doing the right thing. In fact, he said something to me before, and I don't know if it was to me or if it's something that I heard him overhear him say, but he said, you need to always act as if someone is watching, basically. That should help. You hear of people who act one way in public and act another way in private. And he is someone where what you see is what you get, and he's just a very honest, genuine person. And in terms of he's obviously very smart. I think most people would acknowledge that he's very smart, but there's so many people who are smart in politics. I don't think that's what's most important. He has exceptional judgment when it comes to things that really matter. So filtering out the noise to get to the bottom of what's important here, what's at stake here, who are the stakeholders, who has the information, who are the experts, and he's flexible. He knows he doesn't have all the answers, but he's very willing to seek those answers out, and he's very good at that. If you look at his track record and look at the businesses, the nonprofits he's been able to build over time, even his campaign, it's a miracle, right? You look at it and he defies the odds because of his community and team building skills. And that's really what you want in leadership, right? You want someone who doesn't just rely on himself. I mean, he's a principal and he has very good judgment, but he's exceptional at building teams, at putting the right people around him to succeed.
I'm not surprised. I mean, if you think about the impact that he's had with the name recognition that he started with and the resources, sort of the war chest that he started with.
Right, nothing.
Yeah, right? It's incredible. It's incredible. And so what's it been like for you? Now, you recently have started going on the road and you've gone to some events. Like, what was that like? Was that like a surreal experience? What was that? What was it like?
So surreal. I really still do feel like I need to pinch myself. And it's not something I obviously ever imagined for myself or for him or our family. But at this point, I find it such a privilege to be able to have that platform, having so many people respond to his message. There was always a chance that it wouldn't resonate or that he wouldn't have enough resources to get his message out there to have it resonate. But it's very clear that people are paying attention. 1 million donations, $16.5 million raised this last quarter, outlasting very seasoned politicians in this race, and just having the best supporters anywhere. I mean, my favorite thing about being on the trail is meeting the Yang Gang. They're just the best group of people that you can ever imagine. The most creative, the smartest, the most passionate, the most loving of humanity. I just it warms my heart whenever I get to talk to the Yang Gang, and I just appreciate them so much.
It is an amazing group, and I was interviewing Liz Becker, this state Senate candidate, yesterday, and she was saying in Nevada how she loves talking to Yang Gang because they're all like tend to be super reasonable
Mhm.
and positive.
Yes.
And I was curious, like, is that the crowd or is that the vibe that Andrew had? Like, why do you think Yang Gang is composed of such an interesting mix of people? Like, what do you think is driving that?
I think it's his humanity first message,
Mm.
right? It's they see it's almost like they see his heart. They know that he's running for something that's greater than himself. It's like they mirror his enthusiasm and his passion. So yeah, there. I think that we're all very much like kindred spirits.
When you first heard about the humanity first kind of theme,
Hmm.
what was your reaction?
Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Humanity first and the freedom dividend. That is why I let him run for president. It's the reason why I gave him my blessing, because it is such a powerful message. It's something that we as a country are so desperately in need of right now, being so divided. And therefore, I was encouraging of him being out there. I don't know if encouraging is probably the wrong word. It is. But supportive
Hmm.
of him being out there to spread that message. And you know, it has just surpassed my wildest expectation.
Yeah, one thing that I was curious about is you, after college, you worked in marketing. Is that right?
Right.
Are you ever tempted to give Andrew advice on the campaign and how they're deploying capital and spending the war chest, or do you stay out of that kind of thing?
No. There are people who are much more, I don't know, experienced on that
Hmm.
than I am. So I like to say on the trail sometimes that I am his best character witness after knowing him for 15 years and seeing him over the years. That's I think that's where that's probably where I add the most value.
Yeah, I guess there's people steeped in political marketing and campaign finance and campaign operations. Let me ask you this, Evelyn. When you think about issues that are important to you, like one of the things that obviously, if he makes it all the way, or shall we think positively, when he makes it all the way,
Mhm.
and you're first lady, you're going to have a platform to increase awareness about variety of things. And I was kind of curious, like, what are the things that you would want to focus your time on as first lady?
Um, well, you know that advocating for special needs families and families with disabilities is obviously something very near and dear to us, because that's an experience that we have as a family. We have a child with special needs, and it's. I think we are the first family to run for president to publicly embrace the fact
Mm.
that we're a special needs family. So I think that's something that I would continue to advocate. I would to continue to advocate on behalf of those families, special needs and education in general. I think our education system right now needs to be updated for the 21st century. I think it's one of the few sectors that haven't really advanced much, even given
Mhm.
all of the technology and growth in technology. But right now, we still take this one size fits all approach to education that leaves a lot of our children with all different kinds of learning needs behind, whether or not you have a diagnosis, whether or not you have, a learning disability. Everybody learns in a different way. Everyone has their strengths and weaknesses, and I believe that all education should be special, right?
Mm-hmm.
special education for those with special needs. I think if we can get education right, meaning we can teach the kids strengths and work on their challenges, this will address all of our children's education across the board. So I would love to have a hand in, just improving education for all of us, all of our children. Um, and that's, if you think of anything that you can possibly invest in our country, where else, what better place to invest but in our future, which is our children, right?
Why do you think we haven't done more around improving the education we offer our kids? Like in politics, candidates have often talked about, well, I'm the education president, or education is like my top priority. But, when you look back, I don't know that the quality of education has really changed a whole lot over the years. And I'm curious, like, what do you think is the root cause? Like, why haven't we seen more results from all of this attention?
That is a very good question. Because I feel like the resources are there, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one thing that's, I think, obvious is, hey, let's pay teachers more, right?
Yeah.
Let's get the resources into the classroom. Let's invest in our teachers so that they can invest in our children. Let's invest in the physical classroom. The class sizes are way too big. The teachers can't do what they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down to the, when we talk about humanity first, that's what it boils down to. It's the people on the ground, the teachers in the classroom, the students in the classrooms. How do we empower them? How do we put the resources into their hands so that they can reap the gains from the best education instead of administrators, or certainly in higher education, right? We see that college education, the cost of college education has nearly tripled.
Yeah.
The quality of that education obviously has not tripled. So these costs, getting these costs under control in terms of administration, and putting those resources back to where they belong, right, with the students.
My wife and I were always stressing about, our kids are in the right school, or are they getting the right kind of, are we going to put them in the right high school, and all this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's definitely easy to focus on, well, this school is known for this curriculum, or that school has this facility. But what I often remind my wife is, like, look, at the end of the day, the quality of their education is like 99% between that teacher and what happens in that classroom. Like, all that other stuff is great.
Yeah. Shiny.
But the other thing that's kind of unfortunate is, I'm sure, like, when you graduated from Columbia, or when Andrew was coming out of Brown, teaching was not the most common profession for some of these super bright people.
Mm-hmm.
There were, when I graduated, there were people that they did teach for America, but they would do it for like 1 or 2 years, and then they would go to McKinsey or whatever, then they would go to Stanford Business School. And I'm curious, you mentioned how we don't pay teachers enough. Do you think there will ever be a day where it becomes this vocation and this profession that attracts way more highly motivated, ambitious people who also want to give back? Because I don't know that it does that now.
I certainly hope so.
Yeah.
And there are actually very real examples of that. So Andrew's partner, when he was running the GMAT business,
Mm-hmm.
His partner left to found a charter school called the Equity Project. And this school was founded on the premise that the most important person in a school environment is the teacher, and the teacher should be paid very well. They be paid.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's a K through. I don't know if it's K through 12, or it's definitely elementary school age, but they pay their teachers 6 figures.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the results speak for themselves. So there's certainly pilots. It's the kind of thing that I would hope to see across the board, across all public schools. All of our teachers deserve that kind of compensation, because they are doing among the most important work in our society.
If we probably, as an economy, pay analysts at Goldman or or Bain or whatever, pretty good salaries for what they do. And then you think about the impact of those teachers on entire generations of people. It is a little shocking that we don't invest more. And hopefully it's one of the things that you can shine a light on and advocate for from the White House. Have you thought about what that life would potentially be like? I mean, you've already stepped into the public spotlight now, but that would be like a whole nother level.
Yes. And I have to admit, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about being so um, I just, the only thing I can say about that is I would take the job and take that responsibility very, very seriously. I do have a sort of a broad vision of the kind of White House I would like, which is one that's very open and inviting and full of life. I would love to have children there all the time. I would have the doors open to everyone as much as the Secret Service will allow us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in the old days, they did talk about it as like sort of America's house, and
Right. Yes.
doesn't sound like you would go for the fortress White House kind of motif.
No. It would always, I imagine it to always be a very casual dinner party at the Yang White House.
Would you have the boys' birthday parties at the White House?
Oh, sure. And
that would be so sweet.
We were to invite everyone. I mean, we're that type, we're I don't know if you appreciate these kinds of friends, but we can't see a movie without inviting all our friends. So.
I love it. I could see. Does Andrew barbecue at all? Does he fire up the grill from time to time, or?
Yeah. It's one of the few types of cooking that he can do.
There's something about being in the backyard and grilling some meat that speaks to many people, myself included. So someday maybe we'll grill some burgers together. Well, let me ask you this, Evelyn, before we wrap up. I'm curious, do you feel like there's anything or angle or perspective on Andrew that you feel more people should know about, or maybe they get him wrong, or anything you want to share to help folks get to know Andrew better?
I think Andrew is a pretty open book on the trail, certainly. But if you're not paying very close attention, you might think that he's this tech bro venture capitalist, which I really don't know where the press gets this stuff from, right? He's really not a tech bro venture capitalist. He's never been one. He's far, far, far from that. He's this social entrepreneur who's been working on creating jobs in cities like Detroit for the last 7 years. Yeah, so if you're not paying very close attention, then I have a concern that you might just take what the media might portray him as at face value, and that's just not who he is.
The tech bro from California thing is interesting. And I got to ask you, the way the media has kind of reported on him, and sometimes does not report on him at all.
Right.
As a supporter, it really bothers me. Frankly, as an Asian American, it bothers me. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious, how do you handle that when you see these cases where they're either getting stuff plainly wrong, or just excluding him, or not mentioning him, or calling him the wrong name?
Yes, it's pretty unbelievable. And like him, originally I was like, oh, this must just be poor journalism or poor reporting,
right,
full of mistakes,
sloppy,
right? And I don't know. And then now you kind of have to think twice about it, in terms of, well, do they have an agenda? Is there another agenda that they're serving? And that's unfortunate, because the purpose of media, I think, is to enable our democracy, enable it to work better, and that means putting out accurate information. And, Andrew he's building a coalition. He has a following. I mean, he's in most polls fifth and rising. He's one of, I think, maybe the only candidate that's showing such strong growth and steady growth.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is a story that deserves to be out there. People deserve to know, what is making all of these people support this, this man, Andrew Yang. Where did he come from? What are his ideas? And why is what he's saying resonating with so many Americans? That is really, I think, one of the most important stories of this entire cycle. And I agree with you completely that it's not getting out there as it should. But thankfully, with people like you and other people in the Yang Gang and the internet, he's still getting his message out there, and he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I think it's so incredible that he's made so much progress despite the kind of disproportionate absence of media coverage. Like when I first learned about him and then started seeing him get traction, I was like, oh, it's going to be only a few weeks before 60 Minutes tells this amazing story about this guy that came out of nowhere that's promoting like this Freedom Dividend and is like creating crowds of thousands of people, and outlasting like all these quote unquote professional politicians.
Right.
And I haven't really seen that kind of coverage. It's almost like, well, yeah, and then Andrew Yang, if that sometimes.
Right.
So, but maybe there's going to be a tipping point. I certainly thought when he raised 16.5, which is, as a lot of people know, more than Biden did in the third quarter, like that's a pretty big deal for this dude out of nowhere to raise 16.5 million from 400,000 donors. I mean, that's nuts. I should also say before we wrap up, Evelyn, that a lot of us in the Yang Gang, we do what we can to help with the cause. It is not anything like what I imagine your family is doing to really partner with Andrew and support him through this movement. And I know that there's sacrifices that I'm sure in terms of time and resources that you guys are making. And I just want to say on behalf of the Yang Gang, we really appreciate it. And it means a ton. And even like, I was just talking to my two sons and I was saying to them the other day, I was like, guys, like this guy may be the first Asian American president. And they were like, yeah, so of course, like he's Andrew Yang. They have no idea what a huge historic campaign this is. And so I just wanted to say, like, thank you for helping make history already. And, best of luck. And we're rooting for you and fighting with you guys step by step all the way to the White House.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. And thank you, everyone in the Yang Gang. We are here because of you guys. This is how we're still here. This is how Andrew keeps going. You guys fuel him. You guys keep him going. And literally, we would not be here without you. So you make all our sacrifices as a family worthwhile. So thank you for continuing to fight with us.
I cannot wait till we get the first birthday party invitation for the kids. And then maybe Andrew can flip a few thousand burgers for the crowd.
He would do it joyously.
All right. Evelyn, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a real treat. It's been great to get to know you and also to get to know Andrew through you a little better. Mm-hmm. And we hope to have you on real soon.
Absolutely. Anytime, Tom. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. Touch on that because there are a lot of things, the Freedom Dividend is one of the main reasons why I let Andrew run for president. And I love it because it means that so many women in particular, not just caregivers like me and other stay-at-home parents or caregivers who are at home taking care of an aging loved one, it basically recognizes that work that we do every day that's uncompensated right now. And there are so many Americans who would like to be home to care for a loved one, and this would better enable them to do that kind of work. I love the Freedom Dividend for what it would mean for poverty. And eradicating poverty is something that we can do. I strongly believe that it's a moral obligation that we have as a country to eradicate poverty. And I think we've all become way too comfortable with homeless women and children, hungry children, veterans who are trapped on our streets. This is a crisis, and we have the means. We're one of the richest societies in the history of the world. And we absolutely have the means to take care of all our citizens, and we should be prioritizing that. I also need to speak to women who are trapped in abusive situations and they don't have the financial independence to walk away from dangerous and abusive situations, oftentimes with their children. And in those cases, this could be a matter of life and death. And so I think so much of the freedom that $1,000 a month could afford people like that, some of the most vulnerable and marginalized people in our society. And I don't want to forget about them. And I feel like Andrew is the only one speaking to them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we often talk about the displaced manufacturing workers and retail workers and clerical workers and call center workers, and we should, because they will need a soft landing with the changes that are coming. But what you're talking about is, it's not a technology problem. It's a problem that somehow society has just kind of looked the other way for generations.
Right. And you buy into this myth that, there's nothing we can do for them. It's the reason why you feel so guilty when you pass someone on the street and there's nothing you can do but give them, a few dollars. In your heart that we should be doing so much more for them, but you don't know what it is. And then when I learned about universal basic income and how this is something that Martin Luther King was championing when he was still alive, and that this is something that we as a country embraced, over 1,000 economists embraced just a few decades ago.
Yeah.
What happened to us as a society that now we think it's a pipe dream, that the market has overtaken our collective consciousness to this point where we think it's okay, to just let people suffer like that. It's really not okay, especially when there's a solution. And I feel so privileged to be able to be out there and spreading that message. I have said on the trail that I don't really care about automation. I'm sorry. I mean, I get it. I know it's happening. You have to be blind not to see it happening around you. But I love Andrew's campaign and his message of humanity first, independent of automation. And I think that's really important to put out there, because if you are just scraping by and your family is struggling to make ends meet, then you're not thinking about automation. You're not thinking about AI taking your jobs. You're not thinking about climate change, destroying the planet. You're just thinking about getting to the next day. And this is something that we can do immediately to help so many Americans get their heads up, lift their heads up, so that they can plan and look forward to a more hopeful future. And I'm just personally in shock that more candidates haven't picked up on this idea. I mean, some of them have started, to see the success that Andrew, had with his platform, and I think their eyes have been open to it, and they're expressing some interest or curiosity into universal basic income. But obviously, that's not enough. I'm just shocked that in our field of the most progressive Democrats we've ever had, that it's taking this long for them to come around to this idea. Most of them, all of them, politicians in general, seem to all take this very top-down approach to solving problems. And sure, you need laws, you need regulations, you need policies, but we all know that one, they don't always work out as you intended, and two, they take a long time to enact and go into effect. It only makes sense, common sense, that you also need a bottom up approach, as Andrew calls the trickle up economy, right? From our people and our communities up. And you put resources into the hands of Americans so that they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families. And you have to work on it from both sides, right? It's just common sense to me.
Yeah, that's one of the cool things, in my opinion, about Andrew, which is he doesn't neatly fit into the either you're for big government or you're for doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's this interesting third way, which is, well, he wants to use government to capture some of the value from the industries that are growing and maybe not paying as many taxes as they probably should. And then trust that the people they know what's best for them.
Yes.
And that's a very humanity first kind of way of, like, a lot of the big government kind of proponents are like, well, I don't know, like, we should tell them exactly what they should do with this money, and then they should fill out this form and do that kind of thing. And, his is a fresh approach, and I think it's already getting some traction beyond his campaign, but it may take someone like him to really force the conversation. And the fact that in one of the early debates, they actually spent a few minutes talking about it was pretty historic, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's already accelerated this conversation many, many years, right? At minimum.
I mean, a few years ago, this is a very small example, and I'm going to probably fall into the tech bro kind of stereotype. But a few years ago, nobody would have said that you could take like amazing pictures from your mobile phone that's better than an SLR. Or a few years ago, nobody would have said that most cars in some cities are going to be completely electric.
Mm-hmm.
And, maybe the Freedom Dividend is one of those things where 10, 20 years from now, we'll be doing another podcast, Evelyn. You'll be like, hey, remember when no one thought this was possible?
I can only hope.
Yeah.
That's what we're fighting for. Absolutely.
Especially, and I totally agree with you. I was actually in New York this summer. The homeless and the impoverished, especially like the juxtaposition of the homeless people, then you're like right by these huge skyscrapers where people are clearly doing very well in life.
Yes.
And you're like, how is this okay? Like, hopefully this campaign, yes, you're right. Automation is something that I think starts the conversation, but the Freedom Dividend is about a lot more than just dealing with the fourth industrial revolution. It's really about eradicating poverty in a way that trusts people, and that puts power in the hands of the people.
It's about accelerating our society forward.
Yeah. Man, that'll be so cool when he's in the White House.